Well, 7:01. I'm sure that people will still continue to join, but just for the sake of being prompt, and I'll just be doing an introduction anyway. I want to say hello, and I'd like to welcome everybody who's attending the talk this evening, and in particular to Silvia Federici, our guest host. Big thanks to her. So tonight, the evening's event will be an online talk with Silvia Federici, hosted by me, Jo Harrison, which is on behalf of Almanac Projects as part of our #Almanac series, which is an online program focusing on the subjects of care, community, and ecology. And it's organised in response to the recent events, not only of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to confront the ongoing disregard of QT, BIPOC lives and the growing urgency for environmental justice, all of which have pointed us to question and critically rethink the role of our lives and our labour. I was generously invited by Guido Sant'Andrea and Isidre Pandolfo from Almanac Projects to co-curate this emergency response programme, alongside Bianca Stoppani and Astrid Corporal, with additional curatorial contributions from Guido and Isidre. This project is supported by the Arts Council England. We are so excited to be hosting renowned academic, teacher, writer, and longtime activist Silvia Federici for this evening's event. Ms. Federici is Professor Emerita at Hofstra University, and she lives in Brooklyn, New York, where she works with a women's group that run a website called Feminist Research on Violence. In the 1970s, she was among the founders of the International Feminist Collective, the organization that launched the Campaign for Wages for Housework. She's also been active in the anti-globalization movement and the anti-death penalty movement. In the 1990s, Silvia was a member of the radical journal Midnight Notes, and in 1991, after a period of teaching in Nigeria, she helped found the Committee for Academic Freedom in Africa, which for more than 10 years documented the struggle of African students against the austerity programs imposed by the IMF and the World Bank on African countries, which severely impacted university life. She's written books and articles on feminist theory, reproductive work, the politics of the commons, violence against women, and capitalist accumulation. Perhaps most widely known is Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body and Primitive Accumulation, where Ms. Federici argues that women's reproductive labour has been widely omitted from analysis when theorists, significantly including Marx and later Foucault, have investigated the transition from feudalism to capitalism, and that the great witch hunt of Europe that took place over the late Middle Ages was a crucial mechanism implemented by the ruling classes to aid this process. Other publications include Revolution at Point Zero, Housework, Reproduction and Feminist Struggle, Witches, Witch Hunting and Women, Beyond the Periphery of the Skin, Rethinking, Remaking, Reclaiming the Body in Contemporary Capitalism, and Patriarchy of the Wage, Notes on Marx, Gender and Feminism, which will be published at the end of this year. Tonight, Ms. Federici will be responding to some questions that we prepared in advance, expanding on her research to reflect on both the COVID-19 pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. It is a pleasure and an honour to welcome her contribution to the programme. Before we begin, just to do some housekeeping, I want to inform you that this event will be recorded and we will be uploading it to the Almanac Projects website in the following few days. So if you're unable to attend for the entirety of the event, or if you miss parts due to technical issues, you'll be able to access it from the website soon. And we're also live streaming it on YouTube right now. The event should last around an hour, and we're going to begin tonight's event with me asking Ms. Federici our own questions that we've prepared in advance. However, I encourage you to use the question and answer chat bar throughout the talk to ask your own questions, and we will put these to Ms. Federici at the end of the talk. We will ask as many of these questions as possible within the time frame, but please I do actively encourage you to ask your question throughout the talk so that we have a good number of questions at the end. Okay, so to begin, I'll start with my first question. That was a lot of me talking.
Let me say hello first, and thank you for inviting me here in this very, very harsh time. And the greetings to Guido and to everybody who is listening to this program.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you very much. Great, so we'll start. So, Silvia, how has COVID-19 exacerbated the pre-existing conditions of the reproductive process? And how do you think that it has affected women specifically, considering the daily increases in domestic labour, childcare duties with the new addition of homeschooling, and increase in emotional and affective labour, both for those working from home, as well as those who have continued to work outside the home, particularly those in supermarkets, hospitals, as cleaners and care workers, where they experience increased exposure to a deadly disease?
This is a major, major issue. And, we could speak an afternoon and we wouldn't be exhausting it. But let me say this first. I think it's important, and I'm not alone in stressing it. It's important to realize that the COVID-19 has not created, it has exacerbated a crisis that was there all along. Because we have now known for many years that women in particular and communities have been living in the midst of a constantly intensifying reproduction crisis. And the reproduction crisis is that in addition to all the limits of reproduction in a capitalist society, and here we also have to add the different situation, inequality, racism, etc. But that years ago, there was a massive transfer of women from housework, domestic work, to paid labor, and nothing really, when we look internationally, has been replaced, has been created. No new infrastructure has been introduced. On the contrary, almost very, very incredible. It's incredible that simultaneously with the entrance of large number of women in wage work, we have almost in every country the beginning of a dismantling of what used to be called the welfare state, which means dismantling of support to daycare, dismantling of support to all kinds of programs that were helping with the reproduction and support, for example, for senior center, etc. So we have a double movement that has opened a crisis that already was driving many women to really a situation that was untenable before the crisis. We know one of the consequences, the consequences have been have manifested themselves, for instance, in exponential increase in the number of children who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses. Obviously they were not mental illnesses. It's for example, in the United States, children have been diagnosed with hyperactivity, attention deficit in school, etc., depression, and put on pills, right? And given enormous quantities of pills that, their effect is unknown, the effect on their neurological system. All of this. We know that women are big consumers. I know in the United States, I don't know in England, of antidepressants. And because they've been living a life of total anxiety in which they've had to compensate, working in the evening, working in the weekends to recuperate, some reproductive work, in a life where they never had the possibility to regenerate themselves. They never have the possibility, in a sense, to devote themselves to other activity rather than work. So the COVID has exploded this. the COVID has exploded this situation. And the fact that now many women have been forced to work in the home, right? Or if they work outside the home, the essential workers, the essential, you know, and which means often being out of the house, you know, for most of the day and coming home in condition of incredible exhaustion. So that, and with the fear that you might actually bring infection to your family. This has exploded the situation, but also brought, you know, in the spotlight on the home in a way that had not, you know, happened in a long, long time. I've been critical of the women's movement because I think that for many years, only recently, there's been a more interest in care work. I think in recent years, the interest in care work has increased, partly because of the struggle of domestic workers, partly because of the struggle of immigrant domestic workers who have been employed by many women, those who could afford it, you know, to take care of their children when they've gone out. And, you know, this is a whole issue, another element of crisis, if you want. So I think that now we are at the turning point, you know, and, you know, it is a commonplace that every crisis is also an opportunity. And I think that this is where now, you know, particularly a women's movement has to, you know, address its energy, because we cannot continue to live in the situation of really desperation in which so many proletarian families have been living, and all of us confronting the fact that, you know, particularly in moments when you have confront sicknesses or when you have young children and so on, acquire very, very dramatic dimension, like now with the pandemic. But the crisis is daily, and it's affected, you know, the majority of the population.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, I suppose what it's showing is that women were already very organized, but now, as you're saying, this is an opportunity to bring this organization together and implement it in a wider context. Unfortunately, women were already prepared for the crisis in a way that perhaps our leaders were not.
And you know, I think that the COVID has demonstrated something very, very basic, which is that when all is said about sharing the housework and everything, in reality, whether it is outside of the home, you know, or it is in the home, the majority of reproductive work is still done by women. So it's the women now who are the ones who are confronting this, you know, major crisis of having to do wage work at home, and at the same time having to take care of the children, and with the added problem that often the children now are also at home because the schools are closing. And imagine that the drama that many women are living. I know now in the United States, many women are living this drama. What are they going to do? Are they going to push for the schools to reopen and the children to go to school with the fear that they may become infected? Or because it's an existential necessity, they are going to send the kids to school so that at home they could have some peace of mind to take care of their. I know of many people who, when they can, they go to live with their parents so that their parents, father and mother, take care of the children, right? But it's a totally untenable situation.
Yeah, and that has not been, of course, it's not been possible whilst we've been socially distancing, and in particular, of course, everybody who's over 60, 65 have to ultimately be shielding. And I think that that has been a huge hit. That actually brings me to my next question, which was about elder care, which you've also spoken previously about it being in crisis, and in particular how the elderly have been devalued in society because they're seen as no longer productive, in your words. And the question is, now that the elderly have become one of the groups most affected by the coronavirus, the crisis will have inevitably deepened, but do you think that their many deaths are just accepted as collateral damage and unavoidable, the cost perhaps to get the economy back on track?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is terrible. This is a scandal. And I've been critical in some of my writing also of the fact that the justice movement, social justice movement, have not paid enough attention over the last years. That if anything, when we speak of care work, the attention is on the children. And in a way, we are continuing often within the movement the same kind of discrimination and devaluation that has been happening in capitalist society, where those who are least productive become invisible or are left behind. And here again, the crisis precedes the COVID. You know, the crisis precedes the COVID because I have been for years now, you know, kind of routinely looking at budget expenses at the beginning of every year. And the first to be cut are support to the, you know, publicly funded places for the elderly. The publicly funded places for the elderly are the first, or the senior centers are the first that in a budget crisis are the, and we also have had an uninterrupted stream of reports of abuses. And this is not only in the United States, but I know it's also in Europe. For example, I've been doing some checking about Italy, and all the abuses of all time. And it's very useless to also blame, you know, the people who work there, the nurses and so on, because many times people are driven, also those who work there, to very desperation, because the personnel is constantly cut. So whereas in the morning you had to wash, you know, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, now you have to do that for 10. And so you begin to make mistakes, giving the pills, you're making mistakes, they have very long. All of this has preceded the epidemic, and was not a surprise that COVID, in fact, particularly in the first phase, really decimated, you know, created, as well, of course, as in the Black community. But the communities of older people in publicly assisted, you know, nursing home have been one of the centers, you know, of infection and mortality. I don't think it's justified, you know, because society that does not care for these older people, you know, it's really a society that participates in the devaluation of life. You know, I'm thinking of the tradition of indigenous people in the Americas, you know, who looked, you know, at the elderly as those who were most knowledgeable, those who had most experience, and often made the decision for the community because they had seen, they had a history to base their action upon. And the difference with capitalist society, where in fact the elderly is seen, and now more than ever, you know, the elderly is associated with Alzheimer's, with somebody who doesn't know, somebody who is disposable, you know. And we have heard comments coming from top politicians, both in the US and also, well, the president says, it is as it is. People die, it is as it is. You know, but also in Sweden, and also I think in England, right, that kind of accepted that particularly among the elderly, in order to gain herd immunity, right? This is a very, very dangerous attitude, and I don't think we should participate in it.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's, you just hit the nail on the head for me, which is that I think I agree it's a dangerous attitude. And I definitely felt that at the beginning of lockdown in the UK, that for us, it wasn't taken seriously that the elderly were dying in care homes. And of course, for us in the UK, the numbers were botched. And yeah, it did just seem as if, it was a given that some elderly people would die. And yeah, there just didn't seem to, it was so abstract, I think.
Yeah.
And
I want to add that the majority of inmates, of nursing homes that are funded by the state are women. It's the women in particular. And because what you have women who all their life, take care of the other. Women do not only reproduce life, they also help people to die. I think it's very important to say that. The work of helping people to die, which is a major work, invisible, the most invisible of all, is generally done by women. And they work, and often they forfeit the possibility of earning a wage because they're engaged, taking care of everybody, all the men in the family. Yeah. And when the time comes for them to need the support, it's not there. And they are the ones who end into the publicly supported nursing home. And they are the ones who, in the end, are, basically the recipient of this lack of care, to the point, if you have Alzheimer's, they might tie you to the bed. People don't understand. Often I speak of the publicly supported nursing home as kind of lager. They tie you to the bed, or they will leave you in your excrements for hours and hours, so that people have developed bed sores, extremely painful. And it's not possible. And with the COVID, what has happened with the COVID, which I think was a tremendous mistake, was not to allow the families to go and visit people, all in the name of safety. But safety meant the visit of the families to people in these places is a guarantee that certain things cannot be done. If someone is being abused and has bruises on her body or his body, then the family will know. Then the visit of the family is a control, is a warning, it's a help to guarantee. The moment they were forbidden, this was a very dangerous decision to make. Yeah. Not only effectively, not only from the point of view of affectivity, which is tremendously important, but also from the point of view of safety.
Yeah, it's so sad. You make a lot of, unfortunately, very clear points about that. Yeah. Just moving on a little bit. How has the COVID-19 pandemic been used to restructure labour, and which new types of precarization have emerged, and which new kinds of enclosures have sustained them, would you say?
Oh, I think, this is all to be seen. We can anticipate a number of transformations. There is no question. And in fact, this is a debate, and it's an investigation that we really need to carry on and deepen. But it's already clear that COVID is being used. Some would say it has been planned, but it has been used to stimulate a whole new concentration of capital. And concentration of capital also means the decimation of small businesses, decimation of all the jobs that are connected, for example, the small restaurant, the small officina, etc. And a lot of those jobs now are gone. And we have a restructuring that more and more gives power to the big companies. Imagine that Amazon has earned $500 billion since the beginning of the pandemic. And so the wage kind of work, at least in the so-called developed country, the wage type of work at the lowest level with lowest benefit, and in large-scale companies, the type that you can get, if you work for Amazon, or if you work with one of the big, whole food companies. That, I think, are those who are going to expand, and everything, particularly work that was self-employment, it's being destroyed. And so we are still in the middle of this restructuring. But it's something to keep a very, very important eye on, because in the United States now we have millions and millions already unemployed. And it's clear that probably most of them will not be able to return to work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for us in the UK, the moment where things will start becoming apparent will be when the furlough scheme ends. At the moment, it's just a delay. But I think that perhaps the true state of things will start appearing as we approach Christmas.
For us it's very immediate, because the unemployment subsidy, which was $600 a week, has been terminated. And the two parties could not come to an agreement. So, Trump introduced an executive order, which is a gimmick. It doesn't really mean anything, because it's the Congress who has to allocate the resources and reducing the money, and actually expecting the state to front some of their money. And the state are completely bankrupt right now. They don't have any money. So we are now in a big question mark. I think the next month, I don't know, it's going to be very turbulent, very, very turbulent, because the number of people who have been made homeless, who have no money now, no job, no money, no prospect for the future, and risking to lose not only their jobs, and by any form of support, and their homes. This is going to happen within the next 2-3 months.
Yeah.
So we are in a situation that it's really unprecedented in a long time. Some say it's even worse than what happened during the Great Depression, at least in this country.
Time will tell. Okay, just moving on a little bit. You've spoken this evening already about home a lot, and speaking of it as the site of isolation, in particular for women. So I've got two questions here. One is, how is it possible in this time of increased atomization that's been caused by the pandemic, how can we come together and act as a collective subject when we've been kept physically apart? And then the second part is, which you were just speaking about then, about those who have no home at all. And although the leading governmental advice was to stay at home, shelter in place, what about those with no homes at all?
Yeah, oh God, yes. I think the best way to overcome the isolation is definitely to join with other people, other movements. Again, the situation changes depending on where you are. But I know that as much as the isolation has been imposed and is real, and it has increased tremendously the violence against women, particularly because often when they would call, an office and so on, they would receive no reply, no response, particularly in the first months. So that isolation is very real. At the same time, and here I speak for the United States, but we have witnessed a tremendous amount of street activity. After the killing of George Floyd, to this day, thousands and thousands of people across the country are in the streets. And also they are in the streets, Black Lives Matter, protesting police brutality, protesting the rise of white vigilantism, which is now becoming more and more prominent, to basically scare people out of the streets. And also we have had a lot of coming out of nurses, of the essential worker, the so-called essential worker, have been in the street, in front of their hospital at night, protesting the lack of equipment, protesting the condition in which they've been forced to work, but also joining demonstration. And so there's been really another movement and another possibility. And also a lot of people have gone out doing mutual aid. And there's also discussion that attached to it have begun how to go beyond the immediate response, how to go beyond the mutual aid, which is necessary now, and create infrastructures, create reproductive infrastructure that carry into the future and represent points of cohesion and also points of support and reproduction for the community. So there is now, the possibilities are there, and the fact that people have to come out to join collective action. And this is survival. Yeah. This is survival, not only to overcome the sense of isolation and depression, particularly, but you cannot face alone the forces that are now structuring this society. We cannot face them alone. It's only through collective action that we can think not only of resisting, but also of constructing something new.
Yeah. Do you think that we've been able to, I mean, do you think that we've kind of come through this adversity stronger? And do you think it has brought us together?
Yeah, you know, my heart is broken right now. Yeah. Because the last few days have been so scary here. And, you know, responding this question from the United States, I don't know if you heard what is happening in Osa, Wisconsin, you know, where the police, after 3 months of protesting against police brutality, you have a policeman, you know, who confronts a man who is actually acting as a peacemaker. This man Blake, that actually was trying to put an end to the quarrel between two women. And as he's walking towards his car, where he had 3 children waiting for him, they pull him out, and for reason that we still don't know, which means for no reason, yeah. They put 7 bullets, and he's now totally paralyzed, and none of his organs. He's paralyzed from the waist down, but none of his organs have been untouched. So, and now we've had more demonstration, and during those demonstrations, you had white vigilantes, and 2 more people have been killed. 2 demonstrators have been killed. So it's very scary. It's very scary because you see that there is a very powerful, organized from above, you know, response, violent response to a movement who is basically asking to redress fundamental historical injustices that are still structured in the life of Black people and people of color in this society. And the response has been more violence. And in fact, a call to really white supremacy in very, very open terms. And what has happened is this Republican convention is something else. This president is invited to speak and given the podium, you know, to 2 people who have waved a gun at Black Lives Matter demonstration where they were passing their neighborhood, you know, and has really basically carried on the theme of supremacy and the theme of, well, we are the law and order, we are the law and order. And so all of this, because right now we are living a moment, one of those moments where you don't know what is going to happen. But that said, we have also seen something really new over the last 3 months, a very powerful movement, you know, that has brought to the street not only Black people, but for the first time in unprecedented number, also white people. And a movement also that has included, you know, not only, you know, a lot of white, young and older people, but has also spoken of issue of gender nonconformity, has made a whole, you know, opening, for example, to Black trans and so forth. So it's a very inclusive movement. It's a very, very inclusive movement. And this is why I think is evoking such a violent backlash.
Yeah, yeah. It's very frightening, but I think that with, you know, particularly in the US, you know, not just having COVID to confront, but to have every time you go out on the streets, the potential of violence from the police, you know, the risks are great, but it's inspiring that people are still coming together and getting out there.
The main pre-existing condition.
Yeah.
The main pre-existing condition is precisely a system in which you have a cop that can kill the black person with total immunity. You know, when we talk about pre-existing condition, we're not talking about only diabetes. We are really talking of a, you know, pervasive institution of racism.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually leads on to my next question, which is that you've spoken before of capital being indifferent to the loss of life, as you say, and that for capital's continued growth, there will always be a necessary loss of labor power. How do you think we can see these kinds of necropolitics being played out in relation to the governmental handling, or perhaps more accurately mishandling, of the coronavirus, particularly in the US and the UK? And I was thinking especially how the pandemic has disproportionately affected the BAME communities, which you've just been discussing now.
Yeah, you know, well, we have been in the realm of madness. I mean, the response of the government has been, I don't know how to qualify it, you know, ludicrous. First of all, to this day, there's not been a national response. You know, without a national response, for instance, it's very difficult because you have, you know, in a place where you have 53 states, with a tremendous amount of mobility. You know, the fact of not having one unified policy by itself, it's an abomination. And secondly, you know, we have authorities, we have a government who continuously diminish the threat, politicize the question of very basic precaution, like wearing a mask, right? Derided, at least at first, the idea of having text, accused. So we have had the response that basically shows callous, the most callous response, you know, to people's lives, you know. And I think beyond Mr. Trump, which is always a spectacle, and capitalizes on making himself a spectacle and keeping people busy, you know, with these, you know, ventures. I think that all along, what we have witnessed for 20 years has been the dismantling of the sanitary program. And this has not been only in the United States. You know, this has been in Europe as well. I know that, for example, I follow more closely than in other places the situation in Italy. And I know that even though medicine is public, guaranteed to everybody, nevertheless, the funding of it and the availability, you know, and in fact, what you've seen for years, you know, it's such a devaluing of the system. The one eventually will be abolished, because I fear that this may be one of the results of the pandemic. You know, when eventually will be abolished, people will not presumably protest too much, because when you're making it, for example, you want to have a test, and you have to wait 3 or 4 months to have a test that will decide whether you have cancer or not. You know, when you have to buy medicine, except for the few medicine, you know, the life-saving medicine, all the others you have to pay, and pay quite a bit, right? All of this is a degradation, is a planned degradation of the medical system. This has happened across Europe in the places where medicine was guaranteed. In the United States, it's been even worse, you know, because in New York, for example, but across the country, they have constantly shut down hospitals. So many of the hospitals that were, you know, to address the needs of the so-called poor, right? Publicly supported hospitals have been simply shut down, so that it's become more difficult. We have had stories of children in different places, you know, women pregnant giving birth in the car as they were looking for a hospital who take care of them, or giving birth in the whole of a hospital. So the destruction of the sanitary system, you know, how more visible the disregard for human life.
Yeah.
That to deny the help of people, you know, when they need most for their survival. And we won't even talk about the cost of medicine, or the fact that in many places, you know, the hospitals have not been renewed, or they do not provide the kind of treatment that could be possible. So this has been the situation and has to become a key issue for a social movement. And this, of course, has been 10 times worse for Black communities. Because in fact, Black communities are precisely the one who have been more dependent, you know, on those publicly subsidized hospitals. And this is where they have been shut down.
Yeah.
So the whole racism and social injustice and disregard for human life, I mean, have permeated, you know, every element of the infrastructure, the reproductive infrastructure supported by the state.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that in the UK, of course, especially during the early stages of lockdown, there was quite a lot of reverence towards the NHS, and it has been said that British people treat the NHS like a religion, and that there was perhaps something about the NHS which brought people together across a spectrum of political interests and values. But for us, I think the question is, and for most NHS workers, is that you know, reverence, that respect, that gratitude going to continue in the next few months, years? Will the government really, you know, be reinvesting? I find that very hard to believe.
I think two things are very important here, and two things that I want to add. You know, one thing is that we have to be very careful and very organized, because, I mean, I'm not as familiar about England as I am about United States, but United States is going to have very soon trillions added to the huge, humongous public debt it already had. Is going to have huge, huge debt. And no wonder they're going to use that debt. And I think the same is going to happen in Italy, to cut more of what is being given in terms of public medicine. So we have to be very careful with that, because the debt is going to be used as a whip to further curtail social services. And but the other one, and this is more for the long term, but short term, long term, and has to do with the construction of a new society. We also need to start working from the road. We need to work in the community. This is the politics of the common that I've been insisting. And of course, it's not easy because people are very busy, etc. But we need to create form of control from below. Yeah. Because my experience and the experience of a lot of people here is, when you go to the hospital, you have to really struggle. And it's a struggle you cannot carry on by yourself individually, because often the doctor impose on you form of treatment. Or, for example, you go to the hospital to give birth and they want you to have a cesarean cut, whether you want it or not, or whether it's necessary or not. More and more, the cesarean cuts have been imposed. They're actually reducing the amount of time a hospital has to give to a woman to give birth. So in 2 hours, they're finished with you. I mean, this is one reason, and I don't think it's the only one. So we need to have organizing from below to discuss, decide, and join, so that when we go to the hospital, we go with knowledge and with a backup. Black women now, in many cases, refuse to go to give birth without another woman. You know, the institution of the doula, you know, is becoming more popular. because they know that when they go to a hospital, they will not receive or may not receive respect from the doctor. They might say they will not be believed when they say that they feel certain things, right? And so they go to a doula so they can actually live giving birth as the important. They can concentrate on their body when they are doing that, rather than having to fight with the doctor and have another woman who takes care of the struggle, you know. And I think we have to think of the struggle as a broader one, and create the infrastructure in the communities that give us more power when we confront. And this is true also with the schools. It's not true only with the medical system, also with the school. We need to create infrastructure at the community level so that we do not confront, you know, as family, as individual, the state alone. And also we clarify what we want. And also we control what is being given to us.
Absolutely. I think that this discussion of organizing from the ground up actually brings us really nicely onto my next question, which is about the commons specifically. And the question is, how are the current declinations of capitalism challenging the commons? If, as you wrote, commons require a community, what happens to them when the very possibility of being a community, in the sense of commoning, is threatened by neoliberalism?
Exactly. I of course, here is another discussion that could last, because everywhere the commons are under attack at all levels. At all levels, in the urban sphere, in the rural area, you know, communal relation in agricultural commons are being destroyed, etc. No, and in fact, no, clearly, you know, the COVID, it's a big destroyer of the commons. Everybody at home, don't touch each other. The other, the danger, you know, the Chinese disease. You know, I mean, sowing discord, sowing fear. Already capitalism teaches us, you know, to distrust other people, to look at the others as potential enemy. And of course, this adds a whole medical, the fear of that. The other becomes the representation of that. This is a major attack on the idea of the commons, right? But fundamentally, you know, I see think, for instance, the fact that everybody now works from their home, right? Already the kind of work that we do more and more in front of a computer. We don't connect with other people, but we connect to a computer, all in isolation. This is now further intensified, where the work becomes home-based. You asked before about the restructuring. Well, one restructuring is precisely, this is very convenient, because it undermines the possibility of collective action. You will not have to deal with thousands of workers united. Workers united hardly know each other. So I think that this is one of the major work to be done. And I think that beginning from the necessity for mutual aid and this is, I think also Black Lives Matter has been a major contributor, right, to reinstitute, to recreate this sense that no, we cannot think only about ourselves. You know, that an injury to one is an injury to all, the old slogan. And, you know, here is where it is an opportunity. Here is where the pandemic is an opportunity, you know, to realize that it's delusional to think you can actually thrive by yourself, because the forces that have been placed against us are extremely destructive. And only if we really confront them by recreating a stronger, you know, social fabric, a social fabric that has stronger ties of solidarity, we are able to actually not only survive, but also create something different.
Do you think that COVID has acted as a democratizing agent in that sense?
Not really. No, I don't think that the COVID has been democratizing, because really those who have died have been, the people have been already most discriminated. The people already have had to face injustice from all levels. You know, from, you spoke about the homeless before.
Yeah.
What happened to the people who have no home, right? And that's the mockery. You know, again is the concealment. There's a constant concealment of reality. You know, wash your hand. Most people don't have hand, you know, water, you know, and stay home and what? We are talking about this morning, the latest figures were the 40 million people in the United States. 40 million are facing eviction. 40 million are facing eviction. And all through the COVID, we have seen the number of people in the streets, sleeping, living in the streets. That was already very high. You have towns in the United States where for years now, Los Angeles, you know, Portland, New Orleans, there are encampments. People are permanently living in the street. Imagine that has constantly grown with the COVID. People didn't want to go to the shelters, because in the shelters, you're packed as sardines, one bunker next to the other. So immediately, if there is an infection, you are doomed. So a lot of people are living in the park. This morning, I went to walk in the park near my house, and I got a conversation with a guy who has been sleeping there. Now I know him, you know, and he writes, he's writing and he's reading books. We're talking about the books he's reading, and he lives. And this situation is growing because the people are not being taken care of because they have no homes. So I think that these are issues that the movement has to confront. There's been no democratization. COVID has made much worse the situation for people who already had the least of resources and who already had, you know, confronted institutional discrimination, institutional racism. The fact that a few politicians have also gotten COVID is no proof that it has a democratic effect.
Yeah. I've just noticed the time. We've got about 5 minutes, I would say, and then we can move on to a few questions by some of the people in attendance.
If you want to extend for another 10-15 minutes, it's okay with me.
Great. I think that would be great, and then we can perhaps get through. I'll ask one final question, hopefully leaving on the talk on a positive note before we open to the questions. You started talking about it in response to my earlier questions about how to work from the ground up in terms of protecting the commons. And you started talking about the new forms of solidarity that have emerged in the recent months, which include mutual aid and particularly the Black Lives Matter movement. How do you think it's possible for us to safeguard what we've built so far and move together forward in a more cohesive way?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think that the opportunity of this moment, you know, that is bringing people together for mutual aid and is bringing people together in the United States, and how the whole issue of racism and etc. It creates spaces. I think it's very, very important to create spaces where people can come together and analyze from the situation immediate, begin to articulate a program. And I don't mean it in a bureaucratic sense, right? But begin to articulate a whole set of issues that are most fundamental. And on the basis also of that issue, to do work in the community. Because I think that, you know, through the kind of industrial restructuring, economic restructuring that has taken place, you know, beginning with the late 1970s, globalization, right? The fact that, for example, I know in the US, but also in Europe, so much industry has been, you know, moved dismantled or exported abroad. What used to be, for example, working class communities, that with all their limits, all their defects, etc., but they represented a counterpower. Yeah. You know, they could call a big strike, right? And they had the negotiating power. And this is why they were dismantled, by the way. No? But they represented a kind of counterpower. We don't have that kind of counterpower today. So that the reconstruction of that kind of cohesiveness, the kind of sense of a common interest, I think is fundamental. How this is done, of course, there are really basic, issues that are connecting us all. Issues of ecology, issues of racism, issues of misogyny, violence against women, reproduction, how to take care of reproduction. These are the big, big questions, right? And of course, the dismantling of police, but I think fundamentally is how to create a space where, and from there to create infrastructure for communication, infrastructure for decision making, infrastructure for placing our resources together and being able to really work out more power with regard to the state, with regard to the institution, local, national, and international.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll leave it here.
Great. Thank you so much for answering my questions. It's been really thought-provoking. And we've got quite a few questions that have come through from those in attendance. The first question, and I think it's particularly interesting to ask you this whilst you're based in New York and so involved in sort of the US politics, from Heather Vidgen. What impact do you think that Kamala Harris will have on US politics, the BAME communities and policing?
Oh, that's, I wish I knew. I don't know. I fear, and hopefully it will be a positive impact, because there's been some positive sign that she has sent. One positive sign is that she opposed, for example, the death penalty in the case of a court case. She opposed the death penalty. That was a very positive sign. Yeah. Execution have started, really, really very much in the last few months. We've seen more and more execution. And when Trump has given the okay again for execution on the federal level, and this is an issue that is not confronted enough, by the movement. We hear a lot about police and jails, not enough about the death penalty. That should be a big issue too, because it's the support to everything. The right of the state to take away people's life, which has always been used against Black people. The Black penalty, a continuation of lynching, really, today in the United States. So Kamala Harris does not have a glorious at all record with regard to the police. Many say she has changed. So it's difficult to tell. We have seen in the past many volte-face, the progressive talk turning into, well, you have to adjust to what is possible. We will see. We will see. I don't know. But all I can say is that it is very important that people do not place their trust and do not place their hopes in who is elected. I think that the measure always is what people do, is the power that can be built below. The power that can build from the below. That is the ultimate decisive factor.
We spoke of that before, actually, that in preparation for this talk, that even if the Democrats are elected, that the same work needs to be done.
Oh my God, yes. Have you heard Biden, for example? He said that if there is an issue about dismantling the police, he will not support it. If it is Medicare for all, he will not support it. He just sent a big, shout of support to Israel, and he's one of those that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. So definitely we should not hold our breath thinking that Biden is going to be really, it's because Trump is so extreme.
Yeah.
And it's clearly represent that part of capital, because let's not be naive. It's not the matter of his personality. This man is behind the whole party, as behind thousands and thousands of people. He has behind an important section of capital, the energy sector. He's giving them the drilling of the Arctic. He has removed 100 pieces of regulation, of ecological regulation. You can even kill baby bears today in the country. You can do anything you want to a piece of land or to an animal, to any piece of nature. You can do anything you want. He has removed 100 pieces of legislation introduced to protect the environment. So let's not think of him, he's playing on his bizarre personality. In reality, we're dealing with a whole part of capital who is now finding it necessary to embrace, a kind of fascist line. And I use fascism in the broad sense, because I know that it's always dangerous to use terms out of their historical context. So I'm using it in a very general sense.
Thank you. The next question is from Ella Feiner. She quotes you from your book, The Reenchantment of the World, and she says that, she quotes, "The production of our life inevitably becomes a production of death for others."
Yes.
She says that, I read these words like prophecy. You write how it is distance that allows us to ignore this relation. And
yes.
She asks, could you tell us how, if you feel the distance between the production of life and the production of death has changed in scale and proximity, and how this relationship now feels so very close to home?
Yeah, probably I think I mentioned that in relation to the question of fact that, for example, the new technology that often we celebrate because it brings us together, etc., is the same technology that uses material that are appropriated by companies today, through the destruction of the livelihood and the destruction of the entire life and culture of, thousands and thousands of people in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and how this issue, it's not really problematized sufficiently, I think, right? Even a computer, I'm not saying there is an easy answer. I'm not saying the easy answer, but I think it has to be problematized, because even a computer, it uses a tremendous amount of water, right? So we have to incorporate this. Otherwise, we risk, being participant. We criticize the system, but then, I often say, for instance, that the introduction of the computer and the iPhone have won capitalism 2 or 3 centuries of power. Because, my God, people are so now attached, viscerally attached to these gadgets. And I don't want to reduce a very, very complex issue. I don't want to reduce and be accused of, wanting to go back to the spade. No, I don't want to go back to the spade, right? But I think that this deserves a much, much broader perspective and organizing that we have been capable of now. And that was the context in which I was giving this example, yeah.
Thank you. I think that leads on to a question from Adriana Tronca, and she says, in reference to dying and death studies, the Western culture, and especially in capitalism, she says death is not really discussed. It's rendered something far away and even irrelevant for the contemporary consumer citizen. How should this issue be addressed in your view?
Oh my God, yes. Oh God, yes. Actually, that's one of the things on my mind. You know, I always write about reproduction, and this is one of the things. The whole issue of death is so important, and there's so many sides to it. So many sides, and it's really true that it's continuously hidden, continuously, you know, concealed, right? And, you know, one thing, for instance, and this is something that I've learned, particularly talking to women in Latin America, and particularly with women in Guatemala, who have lived so much in the midst of massacres and the fear of death and the destruction of their community, the loss in terrible condition of the people they loved most, and who today continue to fight. They have not discouraged by that, and they do that because when you ask them, they would say that for them, death is not something terminal, that those who have died are still very present, and they live a culture and a conception of life and death that presumes a strong lived existential continuity between those who are living and those who are dying. So that the idea of dying has a different quality, has a different feeling. You don't see yourself as everything is gone. You'll be completely obliterated. But you see yourself as part, continuing, being present. So for me now, it's very important in the struggle to always bring the memory of those who have died. To see that those who have died in previous struggles have to be with us, have to be remembered, not with us in a very abstract way, but very concrete. So for instance, I'm involved in a project with women in Barcelona, in Spain, Madrid, Pamplona, to recuperate the history of the witch hunt from below. For example, going to the archive, taking out the names of the women who were killed, right? Taking out who were those women. Not to just say the witch hunt in the abstract, but figuring out who these women were and seeing how they connect with us, right? So to make the past present, right? So this one is one way, right? And the other, of course, right, is what do we do when people are dying, you know? And the way here, you know, in the United States, you know, at best, if you have certain resources, you may go to certain type of hospice, but generally, you know, the way we die in a situation of really, really very miserable conditions, you know, and the COVID has brought it out, living alone, stuck to a ventilator, nobody could actually really talk to you, only if your hospital, you were able to communicate. You know, some hospital brought a computer so that your family could say some last words to you. But the majority, so there's a whole different approach, you know, to death, that does not treat it as the end of everything and something therefore to be concealed, to be made invisible, you know, and but has to be dealt with, you know, with something that despite death, there is a continuum between your life and the life of your community, you know, that carries over into the future. And I think to reestablish the conception of death, you know, I think is very important, both to not ignore it and also to gain courage from it.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Yeah, thank you for that thoughtful response. Next question, we've got, I think, two left. From Natalie Ma. She says, hearing us speak about the celebration of the NHS, in the UK at least, got her thinking about the figure of the hero. To be a hero, to stay home, our NHS heroes, which she says seems to her as a very masculinized version of care. She asks if you might be interested to speak more about how mutual aid or other forms of care offer more radical versions of what care can be.
Yeah, you know, the nurses themselves, that's one of the first things they often said, I'm not a hero. And if you want to celebrate me, don't just give me an applause, you know, at 7 o'clock every night, which was what happening here. At 7 o'clock every night, for a moment, people opened their window and they went, blah, 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 you know. And no, then if you think that this is important and makes you understand something new, then, you know, join in a struggle to change, you know, the system, so that in the future we do not have to repeat, you know, what has been happening with COVID, when all the sanitary system demonstrated to be unprepared. So I think that this is very important to, the question is well put, the notion of the hero, right? The special person. And yeah, but I think that the mutual aid is, in fact, as they say, every big change is made out of a lot of small changes. And I think that the solidarity that has been built, you know, through the community, including between the community and the so-called essential workers, right, has been much more important than celebrating the heroism or the clapping of hands and so on. It's actually transforming the relationship. For example, and here this is very important, I mean, these are like two different conceptions of what to be doing, you know? Uno celebrating, etc. During World War II, in the United States, when women were drawn into the industry, when they were drawn into the production of bombs, actually, particularly in California, thousands and thousands of women were actually encouraged in the name of patriotism to leave their homes and to go into the factory to produce bombs, which was very dangerous. Many had, what happened? They created for them an ideal system of reproduction. In the morning, they would take their children, bring them to a place, then they would go to work, to the factory. At night, they came back and they picked up the children, they picked up the food, they picked up the laundry, they picked up everything, right? So the government saw it necessary to provide for them a whole reproductive system so that they could actually go and produce bombs. Comes the end of the war, all that was dismantled. And in fact, the 50s was the peak of domesticity. It was the man coming back, the man had to be given a job. These guys had learned to fight, so they were dangerous. So they had to be given a job and a wife at home. Today, what happens? We have the essential workers. They're working 20 hours in the most terrible, terrible, seeing every day people die, seeing every day on their feet, the risk of themselves dying, the risk of infecting their families. Do you think they've provided them with somebody cooking, buying food, washing their clothes of their children? No. They have gone home. If they had a husband, the husband did it. If they had an elder daughter, those women were not helped in any way. But there was the heroes, there was every night on TV, oh, our heroes. This is the hypocrisy. This is incredible hypocrisy. They could have actually helped those women who were on the battlefield. They were fighting with death every day, including their own. But they were not helped in any way with the reproduction of their families.
Yeah.
And these are two different models of where to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although I would say I don't see the model of women going to build bombs. Let me be clear about that.
I think though that that leads on. We've got two actually outstanding questions, which I think lead on quite nicely from what you were just discussing there.
Sure.
And one of them is from Astrid Corporal, and she asks you to speak a bit more about the value of using the term reproductive labor as opposed to care work or emotional labor. And also from Nora Hydorn, she talks about she asked a question about the distribution of labor, since people have been working double shifts or they've been furloughed or made redundant, and the distribution of labor has become even more uneven. And she asks, which ways can you imagine to redistribute labor between the overworked and those out of work? And what are the potentials and pitfalls of informal labor in self-organized contexts?
Yeah, so I use the reproductive, words are conventional, are very conventional. And I've written an article on the notion of reproduction that for the dictionary, for the left dictionary, on keywords for radicals. And I traced the history of the word and the concept and what was attached to it from the 18th century, late 18th century, with the physiocrat, through the women's movement, through Marx and then the women's movement. And, reproduction meant so many different things. And so there's a convention. We, women like me also, I come from this Wages For Housework movement in the 70s. I began to use reproduction in a particular way. It's like a code. Basically, I use that preferably to housework and to domestic work, because to me now, we were very concentrated on housework when we began in the 70s. But then over time, we began to realize that actually reproducing human beings is broader than the home, right? And it's not only outside of the home, wage work, hospital work, for instance, or teaching, but it's also for agriculture. For instance, subsistence agriculture. That's reproductive work, particularly when you have so many women who do not go to the supermarket, at least not in the past, but do not go to the supermarket, but they actually get their vegetables by planting them in the soil. And that's part of their kitchen work. Their cooking begins by sowing their carrots, sowing their tomatoes, sowing, etc. So and then the care of the environment, cleaning up. Now, terrible, where you're feeling so many women are living near rivers that are polluted. Their sources of water have been contaminated. So I'm using reproduction as a much broader term. And so women ask, why don't you say production of human beings? Yes, I could say that. I often mingle the two, but I want, to this day, reproductive work and productive work in a wage context carry different relations and often different subjects. It's still predominantly women. So to manifest, to express that difference, right? To express the difference. But I realize the words have limits. And I always hope that the context in which I use it makes clear the full meaning, right? So that's the first question. In terms of the distribution of work, yeah, I fear that there's going to be even more hierarchies. That in terms of the distribution, the tendency of being that those who work longer and longer hours. More and more people unemployed or employed in situations that are very precarious. Like in Italy, they have the baby contract, the 3 months, they call them baby contract, but the total precarization is now a universal condition.
Yeah.
But more and more precarity and low wages, and then so the differentiation, the hierarchies, I think will have been accentuated. And in that, it's going to be more difficult and problematic, also in terms of creating a good distribution in terms of reproductive work in the home. you know, between couples and so on, and also in communities, because more people now do not live in a couple context. There is, for economic reason or other reason, there is a trend to go beyond the couple, which I think is also a very good solution. Very good. Yes.
Thank you. Silvia, we have one more question, or do you have?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure. Let's go. Sure.
It popped up at the end, and then we'll
okay. Good.
It up. In the UK, it's from Ruth Beale, I should say. In the UK, there have been financial responses to COVID, i.e. the furlough scheme. Do you think there are ways that governments could have acknowledged the crisis in care and reproductive labour in other ways, ways which allow or support this work to be done?
Yeah, I think that and this is a debate. I think we need a big debate and a space for debate within the women's movement. Because also, first of all, whatever solutions, right, we have to understand that the solutions are not final. Whatever solution we have, that they are relating to the situation now, and whether they are good or not is whether they give us more power for more change. I think it's very important never to think that this is the end, to take what is a demand or a strategy as if it were the revolution, right? Number one. And also, whatever solution, very much also depend on the context. So if we're talking about the UK, one thing, if we're talking about, you know, a rural area in Paraguay or in Argentina is another thing. It's very, very important to keep in mind the context, the range of possibilities, and so on. That said, I think that there is a variety, you know, of demands. There is a variety of needs that need to be put on the table. And this has to be the subject of really a good debate, because the decision has to come from below and has to be collective decision. Keeping in mind also the differences of power with which we connect those decisions. Because whatever reforms we demand, you know, whatever policies we demand must be policies that not only expand our resources, but undermine the ways we are being divided. So we always have to demand policies that give more power to those who have the least.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is very important, that they have to be inversely proportional, that those who have less have to receive more. This, I think, is very, very important. I mean, that there's no such a thing as everything is political. Economic issues are political issues. Capital treats them like that. We have to treat them like that. So we cannot think of, you know, okay, let's ask $500 for, you know, childcare, and not think about what are the situation of women who are in different conditions. I think we need services, we need infrastructure, we need more time, and we need also more money. I think as a lot of working class people struggle show, we don't have the power yet to go beyond the money economy. We don't have the power to say no to money. And those who say, oh, this is a money issue, are hypocrites. Often the people who actually have a salary. The people have been always more critical of our demand for wages for housing in the 70s. Were all people who had jobs and were making a very good money or making money. No, but they didn't want us to ask for money, because money is dirty, money ties you to capitalism. They never thought the money tied them to capitalism when they got a wage. The hypocrisy is incredible, right? So I think that we need, you know, a variety. Yeah, for example, we can ask to, you know, decide ourselves the cost of our rent. You know, in Italy in the 70s, there was a movement called the self-reduction movement, communities at that time, they were very, very, very much cohesive, and they decided what they would pay for rent. They decided what they would pay for electricity. We are very far from having those kind of unity. We are very far from having that kind of power. But this is to say that we have to think, depending on the range of possibility, the power that we have, how organized we are, then we can ask. And again, we can ask for services. We can ask for daycare services, but daycare services that we also control.
Yeah.
Where how they organize is not just in the hand of the state, where we have a say as to how our children, are being dealt with in the hours that are in these places. So we can ask of places centered for older people. But again, the question of we being part of the process and the control and the decision making as to the quality of those services. So there is not just the state and from above, but we have also power. So that's a very important step towards a society built on self-government. If this is our goal of a society built on self-government, we then have to begin now where we are in a society where we still depend on the state, but where we can begin to build infrastructure where we have a hand on what the state organizes in terms of our reproduction. And then also in terms of monetary resources, because after all, when you go to a shop, you still have to pay. But monetary resources have always been used in a way that deepen the division among people. So that some get it and some do not. An example is the New Deal in the United States. The New Deal introduced Social Security. Social Security benefited mostly white workers. Social Security, which is the great conquest of the American working class, was basically white America. Most of the jobs the Black people had did not qualify for Social Security. So we have to be careful when we make this demand to see that they are not demands that are discriminating. And it's not enough to say that the demands are not discriminating. We actually have to make demands that are specifically subverting the division. Not only not discriminating, but actually giving more reparation. Reparation, I think, is a useful concept, unless it's used in a way that is very bureaucratic, but reparation, that there is an element of reparation in the demand that we make, because we are in society where people who have been, stripped of everything, for centuries now, and that has to change.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a really great place to end. A very inspiring last response. So we've now come to the end of tonight's event, and I really want to give you a huge thanks, Silvia, for your participation in this evening's talk, and also to your contribution to the #Almanac program as a whole. It's been an edifying and thought-provoking presentation. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you to you, and all the best to you and all the people who are listening to us.
Thank you. I just also want to thank Almanac for hosting this event, and to everybody who attended tonight. And I just want to encourage everybody to continue to follow the #Almanac program, as we've got lots of exciting and interesting events coming up over the next few months. The next event in the series will be a conversation between artists Ibrahim Sissay and Phumzile Sala, comparing artistic and care ecology between South Africa and the UK. And this will be hosted by Astrid Corporal and aired in mid-September. But please keep checking for new updates. So great. Thank you again, Silvia. It's been a wonderful evening, and thank you to everybody.
And to Guido as well.
To Guido as well. Thank you so much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.